3 audio engineers, 2 private detectives, and $250,000 worth of specialists all said the same thing. The recording was dead. Nothing but static and noise. Marcus Holt had stopped believing otherwise. But when 9-year-old Lily pressed her ear close, her face changed. "There are 2 voices in here," she whispered. "And one of them already knew he was going to die." The room stopped breathing. What none of them knew yet was that the man who needed that recording destroyed was standing close enough to hear every word she said. The kitchen in the Holt estate never fully went quiet, even late at night. The refrigerator hummed. The exhaust fan above the stove ticked every few seconds, like a clock that had lost count. And somewhere beyond the tall windows that faced the back lawn, Houston's distant traffic moved in slow, steady waves, a sound so constant that most people stopped hearing it altogether. Most people. Lily heard everything. She sat on the wooden step-stool. Her mother kept tucked beside the pantry door, her small legs dangling, her chin resting in both hands. She was 9 years old, slight for her age, with careful eyes that moved the way a camera does, slowly, deliberately, missing nothing. Her mother, Grace, had worked as the private cook for the Holt household for just under 4 months. On nights when school let out early or the aftercare program closed, Lily came along. She brought a book. She sat on her stool. She stayed out of the way. That was the rule. Grace moved through the kitchen the way she always did, efficiently, quietly, with the kind of focus that came from years of cooking in other people's homes. She was a tall woman, lean and composed, with hands that never seemed to stop moving. A pot here, a towel there, a lid adjusted just slightly to let the steam breathe. "Lilybug," she said, without turning around, "you need to finish that chapter before we leave." "I already did," Lily said. "You told me that at 7:15 this morning, right after you said, 'Don't forget your library book,' and right before you burned the first piece of toast." Grace paused, turned slowly, looked at her daughter with the particular expression of a mother who was not entirely sure whether to be impressed or unsettled. "I did not burn it," she said. "I browned it. Both sides. Go back to your book." Lily smiled, small private, and looked back down at the open pages in her lap. But she didn't read. She was listening again. She always was. The kitchen smelled of rosemary, and something warm underneath it, a broth that had been simmering since late afternoon. The house itself was large enough that you could stand in the kitchen and feel genuinely alone, separated from whatever weight lived in the other rooms. And there was weight here. Lily had felt it from the first week. It moved through the hallways, like weather, slow, heavy, the kind that settles into walls and doesn't leave. She didn't know exactly what had happened in this house. She knew someone was gone. She knew because of the way the man who owned it moved through rooms without looking at them, the way certain doors stayed closed, the way Grace lowered her voice whenever she spoke to him. Careful the way you are around something that might still be fragile. Lily had not yet spoken to him directly. She wasn't sure she was supposed to. She was studying the grain of the wooden step stool, tracing a knot in the wood with her fingertip, when she heard it. It wasn't loud. That was the first thing. It came from the far end of the kitchen counter. A silver laptop left open, its screen dimmed to near black, sitting beside a folded dish towel and an empty coffee mug. Someone had left it there and walked away. The sound that came from it was soft and layered, the way rain sounds when it falls on different surfaces. At once, a texture more than a noise. Lily lifted her head. It was a recording of some kind. She could tell by the slight compression in the audio, the way voices sounded when they had been captured rather than spoken live. There were sounds underneath, sounds, a low hiss, something mechanical in the background, and beneath all of that, like a word written in pencil and half erased, the shape of a voice. Maybe 2. She wasn't sure. She set her book down on the step stool and crossed the kitchen, quietly, stopping a few feet from the counter. She didn't touch anything. She just stood there, head tilted slightly to the left, the way she always did when she was concentrating hard. Her mother called it her listening lean, and she let the sound come to her. There was something in there. She didn't know what, but it wasn't nothing. The way silence was nothing, or the way white noise was nothing. This was different. This was something that had once been a voice, pressed down under layers of interference, still trying to reach the surface. Lily, she turned. Grace was standing at the stove dish towel over her shoulder, watching her with an expression Lily recognized immediately, the careful, firm look that meant a boundary was close. That's not ours, Grace said quietly. I know, I was just listening. I know what you were doing. Grace walked to the counter, reached past the laptop, and clicked it shut without looking at the screen. The sound stopped. The kitchen went back to its regular hum. Some things in this house aren't our business. You understand me? Yes, ma'am. Grace held her gaze for a moment longer, not unkindly, but with the weight of someone who meant what she said, then turned back to the stove and adjusted the flame beneath the pot. Lily returned to her step stool. She picked up her book. She found her page, but she did not read. She sat very still, the way she did when something had lodged itself in the back of her mind and refused to settle a sound, a shape, a detail that didn't quite add up. She had a name for the feeling, though she'd never said it out loud. It was the feeling of a puzzle piece that belonged to the picture, but hadn't found its place yet. She kept hearing it, not the words. She hadn't caught words, but the shape of them, the rhythm underneath the static, the way one layer moved differently from the other, like two people speaking at slightly different distances from the same microphone. Two voices. She was almost certain. Grace turned off the burner and set the lid over the pot. She wiped her hands on the dish towel, folded it over the oven handle, and picked up her bag from the hook near the door. Come on, baby. We're done for tonight. Lily stood. She tucked her book under her arm. She followed her mother toward the kitchen door, her footsteps quiet on the tile. But at the threshold, she stopped. Just for a second. She looked back at the closed laptop on the counter, dark, silent, ordinary, in every way that an object could appear ordinary. Her fingers moved slightly at her side, a small, unconscious motion, as though reaching for something she hadn't yet decided to touch. Then Grace called her name from the hallway, and Lily walked through the door. 3 floors above the kitchen, the lights in Marcus Holt's study had been dimmed so low they were barely doing their job. That was how he preferred it lately. The room was the kind of space that announced money without trying floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a wide mahogany desk near the window, a leather chair facing the cold fireplace. On the small table beside that chair, a crystal glass held 2 fingers of bourbon that Marcus had poured 40 minutes ago and had not yet touched. He sat with his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on the middle distance, not seeing the room he was in, but some other place entirely. A place he kept returning to without meaning to. Marcus Holt was 44 years old. He had built the Holt Group from a regional firm into one of the largest private property development companies in the southern United States. He had navigated crises that would have unraveled most men his age. None of that had prepared him for this. His older brother James had been found in his home office 7 weeks ago. The official report concluded that James had taken his own life. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle. The door had been locked from the inside. Everything pointed in one direction. Marcus had never been able to point himself that same way. A quiet knock came at the study door, 2 short raps unhurried. Come in. The man who entered was Victor Hale, Marcus's personal attorney, and by most practical definitions, his closest confidant. Victor was 61, silver-haired, with the measured composure of someone who had spent decades being the person others called when things fell apart. He had been at Marcus's side through the company's early struggles, through a difficult divorce, through legal battles the press had never fully gotten wind of. He was the kind of man you trusted, not because you had decided to, but because enough time had passed that trust had simply become the default. He set a leather folder on the corner of the desk and settled into the chair across from Marcus with the ease of someone who had sat there 100 times before. You didn't eat, Victor said. Wasn't hungry. The investigator's office sent their final summary, the one you commissioned 3 weeks ago. He paused. It aligns with the original findings. Completely. Marcus looked up. I read it, and I don't know what I was expecting. He turned toward the window. Outside, Houston's October night was warm and clear. The grounds below were dark, except for one thing, a rectangle of warm yellow light from the kitchen windows still glowing quiet evidence that someone downstairs was finishing up for the night. I keep thinking everyone missed something. Victor chose his next words carefully, the way he always did when the moment required more than legal counsel. To investigators, the medical examiner, the report is thorough, Marcus. His voice was even unhurried. What happened to James was something none of us saw coming. That doesn't mean you failed him. I know what the report says. I'm not talking about the report. I'm talking about what you tell yourself at 2 a.m, sitting in the dark with a drink you haven't touched. Victor leaned forward slightly. You cannot keep pulling at this. At some point, and I mean this, you have to let the findings be what they are. Marcus said nothing. He looked back at the window. The kitchen light below held steady, warm against the dark lawn. He watched it without any particular thought, the way you watch something stable when everything else has stopped making sense. He would have told me, Marcus said finally. If something was wrong, James would have said something. Sometimes people don't, Victor said. Even the ones we think we know, completely. The silence that followed was longer than the ones before it. Victor let it sit. He had learned over 15 years that Marcus needed room to land before he could move forward. Pushing never worked. Eventually, Victor stood and picked up the leather folder. Get some sleep, he said. I'll handle the firm until Thursday. Marcus nodded the faint acknowledgement of a man who had heard the words without quite taking them in. Victor moved toward the door. At the threshold, he paused, not dramatically, not with any visible intention, and turned his head slightly toward the window. His gaze dropped just for a moment toward the warm square of light still showing from the kitchen below. 1 second, maybe less. Then he stepped through the door and pulled it quietly shut behind him. Marcus stayed where he was. He reached for the bourbon, at last, held the glass for a moment, then set it back down without drinking. Outside, the kitchen light went dark. Morning came into this Holt estate the way it always did, through the east-facing windows. First long and pale, moving slowly across marble floors that had already been mopped before most of the household was awake. Grace had arrived at 6:30. She had started the coffee set out the breakfast things and was halfway through slicing fruit when she heard the footsteps coming down the main staircase. Heavier than usual, faster than usual, the footsteps of a man who had found something he wasn't looking for. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway with a laptop under his arm. He was dressed, but barely dark trousers. A shirt, not yet buttoned at the collar. The particular look of someone who had been awake long enough that sleep no longer felt like a recent memory. He set the laptop on the counter without greeting. Grace opened it and turned the screen toward her. The playback position on this recording was moved last night, he said. His voice was controlled, but only just. It was at the beginning when I left it here. It isn't anymore. He looked at her directly. Was anyone in this kitchen after 7 o'clock? Grace set down the knife, slowly. The way you do when you already know where a conversation is going and you need a second to decide how to meet it. My daughter was here with me, she said. She sits with me sometimes when I work late. She knows not to touch things. And yet, Grace kept her eyes steady. I'll speak with her. I'd like to do that now, Marcus said. Where is she? Lily was in the hallway, just outside the kitchen, her backpack over one shoulder, her library book tucked under her arm, waiting the way she always waited, quietly, without fidgeting, taking in everything around her without appearing to. She had heard her name. She came to the doorway and stopped there, looking in. Marcus turned to face her. He was a large man, and the kitchen, despite its size, felt smaller, with him standing in it, at that particular angle, shoulders squared, jaw set, the full weight of someone accustomed to being answered when he spoke. He looked at Lily, the way men like him sometimes looked at things that didn't fit the order of their world, not with cruelty exactly, but with a kind of dismissal. that didn't bother to dress itself up. She was 9 years old. She was small. She was the cook's daughter. "Did you touch my laptop last night?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Lily said. There was no hesitation in it. No apology buried underneath, no flinching at the directness of his gaze. Just the word clean, and even the way she said most things. Marcus blinked a small reaction, but the only one he allowed himself. He had expected denial, or at least deflection. He glanced at Grace, then back at Lily. "You played the recording." "I listened to it," Lily said. "I didn't change anything. I just moved the bar back a little." "That recording is private property. It is not something you were invited to hear, and it is certainly not something a child should be. There are 2 voices in it." The kitchen went quiet. Marcus stopped. Not because he chose to, but because something in the way she said it, flat, certain, without performance, made the next word he had been about to say simply disappear. He stood there for a moment, looking at her. "Excuse me," he said. "You've been listening to it like there's only one," Lily said. "But there are 2. The second one is underneath. You have to go slower and listen past the noise." From the corner of the room near the entrance to the hallway, Victor Hale stood with his arms loosely folded. He had arrived 20 minutes earlier for a scheduled morning briefing and had stayed. When he heard Marcus come downstairs, he hadn't spoken since. He was watching now. Not the way someone watches a scene they're waiting to interrupt, but the way someone watches something they are carefully measuring. His eyes moved between Marcus and Lily, but they lingered on Lily a beat longer each time. Marcus exhaled sharply. "You're 9 years old." "Yes, sir. 3 certified audio engineers have reviewed that file. 2 private investigators with combined experience of—" "I know what I heard," Lily said. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't raised. It was simply the statement of someone reporting a fact they had no particular investment in, whether you believed only in whether it was true. Marcus looked at Grace. Grace looked back at him with the expression of a woman who loved her daughter, feared for her job, and was not entirely sure which of those 2 things was going to win the next 10 seconds. "I want them out," Marcus said. He said it quietly, which somehow made it land harder than if he had raised his voice. "Both of them. Now. Grace, you'll be compensated for this week. Someone from the office will be in touch about the remainder of your contract." Grace nodded once. She untied her apron with steady hands, folded it over the counter, and picked up her bag from the hook near the door. She put her hand on Lily's shoulder and guided her firmly toward the hallway. Lily went. She didn't argue. She didn't look back at the laptop on the counter or at Marcus standing beside it. She walked with her mother through the front hall and out the main door into the warm morning air, her backpack still over one shoulder, her book still under her arm. The driveway curved around a fountain that wasn't running. A black iron gate stood at the far end, already open for the morning's deliveries. They were halfway to it when footsteps came behind them, measured, unhurried. "Grace!" Victor Hale's voice came from a few feet back, pleasant and calm. The voice of a man who had nowhere pressing to be. "Let me walk you out, and please don't worry about Marcus. He'll come around. He always does." Grace gave a tight smile and kept walking. Victor fell into step beside them, hands in his pockets, the picture of ease. At the gate, Grace stopped to gather her keys. Victor slowed beside her, and for just a moment, he turned his attention to Lily. He looked down at her with a smile that reached his eyes, the way smiles do when someone has practiced them long enough. "What exactly did you hear, sweetheart?" he asked. His voice was soft, friendly even. Lily looked up at him. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him the way she looked at most things that didn't quite add up, steady and quiet, and taking in more than she gave back. Then Grace took her hand, and they walked through the gate together. The house was different when it was empty. Not quieter, the same systems ran. The same air moved through the same vents. But there was a quality to the stillness that settled in after the staff had gone that Marcus had never quite gotten used to. A largeness, the kind that reminded you how much space you were occupying alone. By the time his last call ended and the screen went dark, the light outside had shifted from the sharp white of midday into something longer and softer, the particular gold of a Houston afternoon that had decided finally to slow down. He opened the laptop. The file was still there, still sitting in the audio folder where it had been for 7 weeks, opened, listened to, set aside more times than he could count. Every certified expert had said the same thing. Static, interference, background noise from an old recording device. Nothing there. He put on his headphones and moved the playback bar to where he had found it that morning, where Lily had left it. He pressed play. The static came through immediately, dense textured. Underneath it, James's voice, measured and clear speaking, the way he always did when he was recording something he meant to keep. Marcus had heard this part many times. He closed his eyes and listened past it. You have to go slower and listen past the noise. He adjusted the playback speed down, just enough to let the layers separate the way you ease 2 pieces of paper apart that have been pressed together too long. The memory arrived the way it sometimes did, not invited, not dramatic, just present. He was 17. James was 22, home for a weekend Marcus could no longer place in any particular season. They were in the garage, trying to fix a radio their father had declared beyond saving. Marcus had listened for 30 seconds, declared the static hopeless, and reached to turn it off. James stopped him. You stopped listening too soon, he said. Not unkindly, more like a man noting a weather pattern he had seen before. There's always something underneath. You just have to decide the noise isn't the whole story. The radio had worked by the end of the afternoon. Marcus opened his eyes. The playback was still running. He leaned forward slightly, the same small angle Lily had used in the kitchen, ear leading everything else receding. He let the static be what it was and tried to hear through it rather than past it. At first, nothing changed. Then, so faint, he stopped breathing to make sure he wasn't imagining it. Something shifted in the texture of the noise. A rhythm that didn't belong to static. A shape that moved differently from the interference around it. Not a word. He couldn't say what was being said or whether language was involved at all. But it was there, a current beneath the current. A second presence in the audio, with a different weight, a different distance from the microphone. He pulled the headphones off. He sat very still, staring at the waveform on the screen. It could be equipment noise, an echo, interference from another device. He knew that. He had been told that in various forms by people whose careers were built around knowing the difference. But James had said it first. 30 years ago, in a garage. You stopped listening too soon. Marcus picked up his phone and called the number Grace had listed when she started. It rang twice. Hello? Her voice was careful. She already knew who it was. I need to speak with Lily, he said. A pause. Longer than a simple pause. Mr. Holt. Grace's tone was measured, the way it always was, but underneath it something firm. I think it's best if we keep some distance right now. I understand that. I'm asking anyway. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it in more ways than one. The line went quiet, then it ended. Marcus sat with the phone in his hand. He looked at the waveform still open on his screen. Then, without entirely meaning to, he looked at the address Grace had listed on her employment paperwork. He closed the laptop. 20 minutes later, he was driving. The address took him east, away from River Oaks, into a quieter part of the city, where houses sat closer together and yards were small and carefully kept. He found the street, found the number on the mailbox, and pulled to the curb. The front door was open, not ajar, not the few inches of someone who had stepped out briefly. Wide open, pushed back against the interior wall. The gap dark and completely still. The kind of open that didn't happen by accident. He got out and covered the front path in seconds. Through the open doorway, the hallway light was off. The living room beyond was dim blinds, half drawn, and in the gray afternoon light he could see enough. A chair tipped on its side. A bag emptied across the floor. A kitchen drawer pulled out and left hanging, the way drawers look when someone has gone through them fast and without care. He stood at the threshold and listened. The house gave nothing back. No voices, no movement, only the faint creak of the open door, shifting in the afternoon breeze, and the particular silence of rooms that had been disturbed and then abandoned. Grace and Lily were gone. He stepped inside. The hallway floor was hardwood worn smooth in the middle, the way floors get when the same path has been walked 1,000 times. A row of hooks near the door held a rain jacket, a child's backpack strap that had slipped halfway off, and a reusable grocery bag folded flat. Everything in the house spoke of someone who kept things orderly, not because they had excess, but because order was one of the things that didn't cost anything, which made the disruption easier to read. Someone had moved through the rooms quickly and with purpose. The couch cushions had been lifted and replaced at slightly wrong angles. The kitchen cabinets were closed, but not latched, the kind of detail you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. A small bookshelf in the hallway had been pulled half an inch from the wall and pushed back, leaving a thin line in the dust on the baseboard. Marcus moved through each room, the way he'd learned to assess a space methodically, without touching anything cataloging what he saw. Most things were where they belonged. A jar of coins on the kitchen counter, a phone charger still plugged into the wall, a watch on the bathroom shelf. Whoever had come through here wasn't looking for things to take. They were looking for something specific. In the small bedroom at the back of the house, a child's room, neat and personal, with a library book on the nightstand, and a row of hand-labeled folders on the desk, a single drawer sat fully open. The desk's surface had been cleared in a sweep, leaving faint drag marks in the thin layer of everyday dust. A pencil cup had tipped and rolled to the edge without falling. And on the desk, where something small and rectangular had clearly rested, a clean outline in the dust, roughly the size of a paperback, there was nothing. Marcus looked at that outline for a long moment. Then he heard voices from next door. The neighbor was a woman in her 60s who answered her door in a housecoat and immediately stepped aside without being asked, the way people do in neighborhoods where something feeling wrong means everyone gets involved. Grace and Lily were in the living room, Grace standing with her arms crossed tight over her chest, Lily sitting on the edge of a floral sofa with her backpack in her lap, still and watchful. Grace looked up when Marcus appeared in the doorway. Whatever she had been expecting, it wasn't him. "The door was open when we got back," she said, before he could speak. "We didn't go in. We came here." "Good," Marcus said. He looked at Lily briefly, then back at Grace. "I think you should come with me tonight, both of you." Grace's expression shifted through several things in quick succession. Wariness, pride, the particular calculation of a woman deciding how much of her independence to trade for safety. She looked at her daughter. Lily was already looking at Marcus. "Okay," Lily said. They were on the highway before anyone spoke. The city moved past the windows in long ribbons of light, the downtown skyline rising and falling as the road curved. Grace sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap, looking straight ahead. Lily sat behind Marcus, her backpack between her feet, her chin slightly raised, the way it was when she was working something out. "Mr. Holt," she said. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror. "Go ahead." The voice in the recording. She paused, not for effect, but the way she always paused, giving the thought room to land properly before she released it. "I've heard it before." The car was quiet. "Where?" Marcus asked. "At our house, about 3 months ago. A man came to the door and talked to my mama for a long time. I was in the next room." Another pause. "He had a nice voice, the kind that makes you think everything is fine." She looked at the back of Marcus's headrest. "He came back twice after that. He's the one who told my mama about the job at your house." Marcus's hands adjusted slightly on the wheel. In the passenger seat, Grace had gone very still. "Grace," Marcus said carefully. She didn't respond immediately. She was staring through the windshield at the road ahead, but her eyes had the unfocused quality of someone who is no longer seeing what's in front of them. Someone who is looking backward, instead, replaying something, measuring it against what she now understood. "He said he was a friend of the family," she said. Her voice came out quieter than usual, stripped of its usual composure. "He said the position had just opened up, and he thought of me specifically. he said. She stopped, pressed her lips together. He said it was a good opportunity, that the Holt household was a good place to work. She turned to look at Marcus. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know any of it. I know you didn't, Marcus said. I brought my daughter into that house. The words came out with a weight that had nothing to do with volume. I walked us both straight through the front door. And I didn't… Mama? Lily's voice was quiet. She reached forward from the back seat and placed her hand over her mother's small fingers, over larger ones. A child's hand, covering an adult's the way it almost never goes. It's not your fault, Lily said. He needed someone inside the house. He picked you because you were good at your job and you wouldn't ask the wrong questions. She kept her hand where it was. He was counting on you not knowing. Grace looked down at her daughter's hand. She didn't speak, but something in the rigid line of her shoulders softened. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. Marcus said nothing. He let the moment be what it was. He drove. The highway stretched ahead, the lanes mostly clear at this hour, the city lights beginning to thin as they moved toward River Oaks. Marcus kept his speed, even his eyes moving between the road and the mirrors with the practiced regularity of someone who had been driving long enough to do it without thinking. It was on the third check that he noticed it. 4 cars back, a dark sedan maintaining distance with the particular consistency of a vehicle that was not simply heading in the same direction. When Marcus moved to the center lane, the sedan moved. When he eased his speed slightly, the sedan eased too, not matching him precisely, but adjusting, staying 4 cars back with a kind of patience that didn't come from coincidence. He didn't say anything. He looked at the road ahead. He looked at Grace, who was staring out the side window now, and at Lily in the mirror, who was watching him watch the mirror. Their eyes met briefly in the reflection. Marcus looked back at the road. Behind them, the headlights held their distance, steady, patient, and absolutely unwilling to go dark. By the time they reached River Oaks, the city had thinned into the particular stillness that comes after midnight. Fewer lights, fewer sounds, the kind of hour that makes large houses feel even larger. Marcus had given them the guest suite on the second floor. Grace had looked at it without comment, set her bag down, and within 20 minutes had fallen asleep in the armchair near the window with her shoes still on. The day had taken whatever was left of her. Lily had covered her mother with the throw blanket from the foot of the bed. Then she had come downstairs. Marcus heard her. Before he saw her, a soft sound from the hallway, something between a hum and a whisper, rhythmic and low. She stood in the study doorway with a small notepad tucked under her arm, wearing the focused expression of someone halfway inside a problem. You should be sleeping, he said. I'm not tired. He looked at her for a moment, then gestured toward the small table near the window. Sit. Don't touch anything. She sat, set the notepad on the table, uncapped a pen, and looked at the open laptop. Can I listen again? He turned the speaker toward her and pressed play. She didn't lean in or close her eyes. She sat very still, her pen hovering above the notepad, and began to hum softly, barely audible a sound that tracked the audio, the way a shadow tracks its source. When the static shifted, her hum shifted with it. When something moved in the lower register, her voice followed, feeling along the edges of a shape she was trying to map from the outside. Every few measures, she stopped and made marks on the notepad, not words, but lines and curves, a private system that seemed to mean something only to her. At 2:30, Marcus called Victor. It wasn't unusual. Victor kept late hours and had told Marcus years ago to call whenever. He arrived 20 minutes later, letting himself in with the key he'd carried for a decade, silver hair, slightly less composed than usual manner, entirely unchanged. His eyes moved briefly to Lily at the window table. Who's this? Grace's daughter, Marcus said. She's staying here tonight. There was a situation at their house. He didn't elaborate. I want to talk about the recording. Victor settled into his chair. Marcus, I heard something in it today. A second layer. I'm not asking you to validate it. I'm asking you to listen. with the patience of a man who had talked Marcus through more than one fixation that turned out to be grief in disguise. Victor nodded. All right. Marcus put the headphones on the desk between them and played a specific timestamp further in where the static's texture changed. Victor leaned forward, expression attentive and unreadable. At the window table, Lily had gone quiet. Not the quiet of someone who had stopped working. The quiet of someone who had stopped because something else required their full attention. Her pen rested against the notepad. Her head tilted at that slight angle, the listening lean, and her eyes, though aimed at the table's surface, were not seeing it. After a few minutes, Victor straightened and shook his head. I hear the interference. I don't hear a second voice. There's a frequency shift at the 40-second mark, Marcus said. It could be the recording environment, the internal components of that device. I know what it could be. Then you know that wanting something to be there doesn't make it so. Victor's voice was even not unkind. The evidence has been reviewed twice by professionals. I understand why you're looking, Marcus. But James is gone. And the way he left, he paused. At some point, you have to let the findings be what they are. The room held that. From across the room, a small voice entered the quiet, not aimed at either of them, not performing. What time does the frequency shift? Lily asked, eyes still on the table. Both men looked at her. 40 seconds, Marcus said. She nodded, wrote something on the notepad, and said nothing further. Victor glanced at her. What are you writing? Lily looked up at him directly, fully, the way she looked at things she was carefully cataloging. Just notes, she said. Easy, unremarkable. Victor held her gaze a half-second longer than the question required. Then he smiled, pleasant, practiced, and turned back to Marcus. Get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and moved toward the door with the ease of a man whose conscience offered him no resistance. Good night, he said generally to the room, and left. Lily watched him go. She tracked his footsteps down the hallway, listened to the front door open and close, listened to the faint sound of a car pulling away from the driveway. She sat with all of it, the voice, the smile, the half-second too long. Then she looked down at the notepad. In the margin beneath the lines and curves she had been making all evening, 4 words sat inside a small, careful box she had drawn around them during the conversation. The ink was pressed slightly deeper than the rest, the kind of pressure that happens when a hand is working hard to stay steady. She stared at those 4 words for a long moment. Then she set the pen down and looked at Marcus across the room. He was studying the waveform on his screen, unaware. Lily said nothing. She turned back to the notepad, placed her palm flat over those 4 words, and kept it there. Sleep had not come. Not for Marcus. Not through the hours after Victor left. Not in the stretch between 3 and 5, when the house was at its most still. Not in the gray approach of morning, when the sky outside shifted from black to the colorless tone that precedes dawn, without quite being it. He had sat at his desk through all of it. Made coffee around 4, drunk half, left the rest to go cold. He heard Lily on the stairs before the light outside had fully decided what it wanted to be. She appeared in the doorway the same way she always did, without announcement, without hesitation. Still in yesterday's clothes. Clearly hadn't slept either. She walked to the chair across from his desk and sat down. It's Victor, she said. The words landed with a weight disproportionate to their size. Marcus looked at her. It took a second, the way cold water takes a second to register. Then something in his jaw tightened. What did you say? The second voice in the recording? Lily said. It's Victor. I recognized it last night when he was in the room. No decoration. No look asking him to believe her. Just the fact placed between them. Marcus leaned back slowly. Victor Hale, 15 years. The closing of the deal that built the Holt Group's first major development. The waiting room during the worst night of his divorce. The one who drove to collect the initial report so Marcus wouldn't have to go alone. 15 years of presence that filled in the gaps other people left. You're 9 years old, Marcus said. Quiet, controlled. You heard a recording twice. You heard Victor speak for 10 minutes. And you're telling me, I know what I heard, Lily said. Both times. Recordings distort. The interference alone. I'm not saying they sound similar, she said. I'm saying it's the same voice. The way he slows, before a sentence he's already decided on. The way he drops the last word slightly. It's the same. A pause. I don't make mistakes about voices. Marcus stood and walked to the window. Outside, the lawn was colorless, in the early light, the trees along the property line standing still. Victor has been with me through everything, he said, more to the window than to her. He was with me when James. He stopped, turned. Do you understand what you're asking me to believe? Yes, she said. That's why I didn't tell you last night. The room went quiet. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. She sat with her hands in her lap, back straight expression, carrying none of the things he expected. No defensiveness, no anxiety about whether he believed her, no performance of certainty. She looked like someone who had already accepted that the truth was the truth, regardless of whether he caught up to it. It unsettled him more than the words had. Then listen again, Lily said. Not the part you always go to. Go further. Don't stop before the end. He stood there a moment longer. Then he crossed to the desk, sat down, and put the headphones on. He moved the playback bar, past every timestamp he had ever used, past James's voice, past the frequency shift, past the point where every expert had stopped, further in, into the dead space at the tail end of the audio where the static flattened and the waveform went nearly silent. He pressed play. 30 seconds of nothing, static. The low hiss of old equipment. Then it came. Not words, not at first. A shape. A rhythm beneath the interference that had the cadence of deliberate speech. It moved differently from the static around it, pressing forward with the intention of something trying to be heard. Faint pressed so deep into the recording's lower frequencies that you'd have to be listening for it, specifically to find it at all. But it was there. And then surfacing, for just a moment, like something breaking the waterline, a single, unmistakable quality. Not a word, just the specific texture of a voice he had known for 40 years. The cadence of it, the weight of it, the way it shaped sound, even when it could barely be heard. Marcus pulled the headphones off. He sat completely still. The cursor blinked at the tail of the audio file in the quiet of the early morning. James, he said. Barely above a breath, not a question, not a statement, just a name released into the space where the voice had been. You were still talking. Lily said nothing. She sat across the desk and let him have the moment the way she always let things be, what they were, without crowding them, without claiming any part of them for herself. The silence lasted perhaps 10 seconds. Then every light in the house went out. Not gradually, not room by room, all of it the desk lamp, the hallway, lights, the green indicators on the security panel. The laptop screen gone, simultaneously, as though something had reached for the whole house at once and closed its hand. The study was completely dark. Outside, the pre-dawn sky offered the faintest gray outline of the window. Nothing more. Marcus didn't move. Somewhere deeper into the house, something settled a sound, without a clear source. The kind buildings make when systems that have been running go suddenly, completely still. Then nothing. The darkness was total. Not the soft dark of a room at night, where eyes adjust and shapes emerge from shadow. This was the hard dark of a space where every source of light had been removed simultaneously. No standby, glow from electronics, no green pulse from the security panel. Nothing from the hallway beyond the open door. The kind of dark that has weight. Marcus was on his feet before he fully understood why. Stay where you are, he said. He heard Lily shift in her chair, the small sound of someone who had gone very still rather than moving. Good. He crossed to the door by memory, felt for the frame, found it, and pulled it shut. The lock was a simple interior bolt. He slid it home and stood with his back against the door, listening. The house was not silent. Houses never are. Pipes settled. The HVAC system had stopped, but its absence created its own texture. And beneath all of that, footsteps. Distant, deliberate moving in a direction that Marcus placed somewhere near the basement stairwell. The server room was down there. He had installed it 3 years ago. A climate-controlled space that ran the estate's security system, camera network, and primary communications hub. It was not a room anyone on the household staff had access to. The code changed monthly. There were exactly 3 people who knew the current sequence. Marcus was one of them. Victor was another. He stood against the door and let that land. Then he reached for his phone and pressed the side button. The screen stayed black. He tried again. Nothing. Not a low battery warning, not a searching signal indicator. The kind of dead that meant the signal itself had been removed from the equation, not just interrupted. "Your phone too," Lily's voice came from across the room. Calm. Practical. "Yes." A pause. Then the soft sound of movement, careful, unhurried. "I have something." He heard her before he could see her. The faint scrape of a shoe against the floor. Then a small sound he couldn't immediately identify. A zipper, maybe. Something being worked loose. "Here." Her voice was closer now. He reached out in the direction of her voice and felt something small and flat pressed into his palm. He ran his thumb across it, a thumbnail drive, roughly. Small, smooth on one side, ridged on the other. "What is this?" "A micro SD card," Lily said. "I copied the recording onto it before we left the study last night. The card was in my shoe. A beat. My daddy always said, keep a backup somewhere, they won't look." Marcus held the card for a moment. In the complete dark of the room, he could not see her face, but he could place her 3 feet away, standing steady, offering him this, the way she offered most things, without ceremony, without waiting to be thanked. He moved to the desk, by memory, 8 steps slight left, to avoid the chair. The desk drawer, on the right side, held a secondary phone, the kind kept charged and off network for travel. He had put it there 2 years ago, after a trip to a city where his primary carrier had no coverage, and he had spent 6 hours unreachable. He had never used it since. He found it pressed the power button and waited. The screen came up dim, the battery at 61%, no cellular signal, but functional. He found the card slot on the side, seated the micro SD carefully, and navigated to the files by the light of the screen alone, which in the full dark of the room felt almost bright. The audio file was there. He pressed play. The static came through the phone's small speaker, thin and compressed, but recognizable. The same recording, the same texture, the same low interference that had occupied him for 7 weeks. Lily moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could see her face in the faint glow of the screen. She was watching the file's progress bar with the focused attention of someone tracking something specific. "Go to the end," she said quietly. "I know," he said. He moved the bar forward, past the familiar sections, into the tail end of the file. The static thinned, the waveform flattened. The phone's speaker rendered it all in the small, compressed way of a device not built for this. But it was enough. He pressed play again and raised the volume. They stood together in the dark. A man in his mid-40s who had built his life on certainty, and a 9-year-old girl who had walked into it 3 days ago and quietly begun taking it apart, and they listened. The file ran. Outside the locked door, the house remained still. And then from somewhere beyond it, from the direction of the main hallway, a sound arrived that was neither the house settling nor the silence filling. Footsteps, measured, unhurried. The footsteps of someone who knew where they were going and saw no particular reason to rush. They came down the hallway and stopped directly outside the study door. A silence followed that had a different quality from the ones before it, not empty but occupied. The silence of someone standing on the other side of a door deciding. Marcus reached out without looking and pressed the phone face down against his chest, killing the screen's light. The room went completely dark again. Neither of them moved. Then slowly, so slowly, it might have been imagined, except that it was not the door handle turned. The handle moved, stopped, moved again, testing methodical, the way someone tries a door when they already suspect what they'll find, but want confirmation anyway. The bolt held. Marcus stood with one hand flat against the door, his weight forward, his breathing controlled. Beside him in the dark, Lily had not moved. She stood exactly where she had been, the phone pressed between them, casting no light giving nothing away. The pressure on the handle released. Then the footsteps retreated back down the hallway, measured and unhurried, growing fainter until the house absorbed them entirely, and the silence returned different from before, not empty, waiting. Marcus exhaled slowly. He didn't move away from the door. "They'll come back," Lily said. Not a question. "Yes," he said. He turned from the door and raised the phone's screen just enough to see by a narrow circle of dim light that barely reached the walls. Lily was already moving back toward the desk, her steps quiet and certain in the dark, the way they were everywhere. She had a spatial memory for rooms she had been in. Marcus had noticed. She never bumped into anything. She never hesitated at a threshold. He followed her to the desk and set the phone between them, screen up, volume low. "Play it again," she said. He navigated to the file and pressed play. The recording came through the small speaker in the compressed, flattened way of audio that had been copied one generation too many. Like a photograph of a photograph, each pass losing something the original had held. The static was denser now. The familiar sections were there, but thickened. Certain frequencies gone entirely, the edges of James's voice blurred to the point where Marcus had to concentrate to place it. The tail end was worse. The section they needed most, the deep layer, the second presence he had found less than an hour ago, came through as little more than texture. Shape without content. A rhythm that suggested language without delivering it. He looked at Lily. She was already listening, with her eyes closed, her head at that slight angle, the way she listened to everything that mattered. Her lips moved faintly, not speaking, tracking, following something in the audio that the speaker was only partially rendering. "The first part," she said without opening her eyes. "He says his name, then a date, then he says yours." Marcus went very still. "You can hear that. I could hear it last night, before the copy." She opened her eyes and looked at the phone. "The copy cut some of it, but I remember what was there." She straightened slightly. A small adjustment, the way a person settles before something that requires their full attention. "I'll fill in what the copy lost," she said. "You record it." Marcus switched the phone to its recording function without a word. He held it between them and nodded. Lily began. She didn't perform it. She didn't announce it. She simply started speaking in a low, even voice, following the audio as it played through the speaker, and layering her memory over the gaps, the way you would trace a torn map, not recreating it exactly, but reconstructing the shape of what had been there. Where the static swallowed a word, she supplied it. Where the copy had blurred a phrase into noise, she stepped in and held the line. Her voice was quiet enough not to cover the original, but present enough to fill the spaces, and the effect was something Marcus had no framework for the recording. And the memory of the recording running together, a 9-year-old girl stitching a document back together from the inside of her own mind. He listened, and beneath it all rising incrementally, as Lily's voice built the scaffolding around it, the shape of James's voice began to clarify. Not loudly, not completely, but the cadence of it gathered itself out of the static syllable by syllable, the way a face becomes recognizable in a photograph that is slowly coming into focus. Marcus did not speak. He did not trust himself to. From the doorway, a sound arrived, soft, barely there. The kind of sound that happens when someone wakes in an unfamiliar place and takes a moment to understand where they are. Grace stood at the threshold. She had come downstairs without them hearing her, still in her clothes from yesterday, the throw blanket from the guest room, folded over one arm, her face carrying the particular disorientation of someone whose sleep had been light and whose mind had not fully stopped working during it. She looked at the faint glow of the phone screen, at her daughter's profile in the dim light, at the low sound of Lily's voice moving through the dark room with a steadiness that seemed to belong to someone much older. Grace did not speak. She lowered herself carefully onto the small bench near the bookshelf, the seat closest to the door, the one that kept her at the edge of the room rather than inside it, which was how she had always positioned herself in this house. She set the blanket across her knees. She folded her hands on top of it, and she listened to her daughter's voice fill in the spaces of a dead man's final words in the dark, in a house that had locked itself against them. And something in her face moved in a way that had no name for it. Not grief, not pride, not fear, but some convergence of all three that simply sat there, unresolved, asking nothing. Her eyes grew bright. She did not wipe them. Lily continued. The file was nearly at its end now, the familiar flatline of the tail section running under her voice. And as it did, the shape in the audio shifted one final time, gathering, pressing upward through the interference, the way James's voice had done before, only stronger, now held in place by everything Lily was giving it. Not words yet, but close enough that Marcus heard the shape of his own name in it, the weight of 2 syllables that had been spoken by that particular voice for 40 years. He pressed his hand flat on the desk. The file ended. Lily stopped. The room was quiet, in the full, settled way of something that has just been completed. Grace sat motionless on the bench near the door. Marcus stood with his hand still flat on the desk, not quite ready to lift it. Then, from somewhere beyond the locked door, down the length of the dark hallway, the footsteps returned, measured as before, unhurried as before. But this time, underneath them, faint, metallic, unmistakable, the sound of a key being worked into a lock. Marcus moved before the sound fully registered. The bookcase beside the door was solid oak, built into a rolling base that the previous owner had installed for reasons Marcus had never thought to question until this moment. He grabbed the side of it with both hands and pushed. The wheels resisted, then gave, and the case scraped across the hardwood floor and met the door with a weight that made the frame shudder. He pressed his back against it. From the other side, the key found the lock. The mechanism turned. The door pushed once sharp and met the resistance of 300 pounds of shelving and stopped. Silence. Then, after a moment, the pressure released. The key withdrew. The footsteps moved away from the door, not retreating, repositioning, looking for another way in, or waiting, or both. Marcus stayed against the bookcase. His breathing was controlled. His mind was not. "Keep going," he said. Lily was already at the desk. She hadn't stopped when the door hit the bookcase. She hadn't flinched at the impact or turned toward the sound. She was seated in the chair where Marcus had been an hour ago, the phone in front of her, the recording still open on the screen. She had one hand on the desk for steadiness, and her eyes focused on the middle distance, the way they did when she was pulling something from the interior of her memory, rather than from the world in front of her. Grace stood beside her, not touching, not speaking, but close, present in the way a person is present when they have decided that closeness is the only thing they have to offer, and they are offering all of it. Lily's voice came back into the room, low and steady. She had reached the tail end of the file. Now, the deep section, the part that the copy had blurred, and her memory was restoring. She moved through it with a precision that had nothing performative in it, filling the spaces between the static. Not because anyone was watching, but because the spaces needed to be filled, and she was the one who could do it. The recording ran. Her voice ran alongside it. And then, in the way that something long, submerged finally reaches the surface, not suddenly, but inevitably, the layer beneath the layer arrived. It came through differently, from the shape Marcus had heard before, clearer, shaped by Lily's reconstruction into something, with edges and direction, the way a signal becomes a message, when the receiver is finally tuned to the right frequency. And it was James's voice, unmistakably, completely, without the ambiguity that had haunted every previous listen, speaking with the careful deliberateness of a man who had chosen every word and placed them in this recording like objects in a sealed room, waiting for the right person to open the door. Lily read what she heard. Marcus listened to both at once, the ghost of the recording and the living voice giving it back. Marcus. The name alone was enough to put Marcus's hand flat against the bookcase behind him. If someone found this, you finally stopped running. He closed his eyes. Victor has been taking from the company for 6 years. The evidence is in the overseas account. Folder James M. Everything is there. Grace's hand found Lily's shoulder. Lily did not stop. But little brother, the words came slower now. Not because Lily slowed, because James had. Because whatever he had recorded in that room, on that day, in the time he had left, this was the part he had taken the most care with. I was never angry at you. Not once. I know you thought I was. I know you've been carrying that. Marcus opened his eyes. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of the phone screen. And in that light, he could see Grace's face and Lily's profile, and the door still held against its frame by the weight of the bookcase. I just needed you to be braver than I was. That's all I ever needed from you. He pressed his hand harder against the wood. I love you. I always did. Now finish this. The recording ended. Lily's voice stopped with it. The room held the silence, the way a room holds the last note of something not empty, but resonant, still vibrating at a frequency that had nothing to do with sound. Marcus did not move for a long moment. Then his knees bent, not controlled, not chosen, and he lowered himself to the floor. The way a structure lowers itself when the thing that has been holding it upright is suddenly, finally allowed to rest. He sat with his back against the bookcase and his hands in his lap, and his face doing something he had not permitted it to do in 7 weeks, in the presence of staff attorneys, investigators, or anyone else who had passed through his life since the morning the phone call came. He wept, not loudly, not with the performance of grief that public loss sometimes produces, quietly, thoroughly, with the particular release of someone who has been holding a door shut against something enormous and has simply, at last, let go of the handle. Lily sat at the desk and did not look away. She did not look away because looking away would have suggested that what was happening required privacy from her, that she was a witness to something she wasn't supposed to see. And she understood, in the way she understood most things, that what Marcus needed in this moment was not to be left alone with it. So she stayed, and she let it be what it was. Grace stood with her hand still on Lily's shoulder, her own eyes wet, looking at the man on the floor, with an expression that held no judgment and no pity, only the recognition of someone who knew what it cost to finally stop pretending. The silence stretched. Then the bookcase moved. Not the door, the bookcase. Something hit it from the other side with a force that scraped the wheels 3 inches across the floor, and the door behind it swung inward, and the gap it created was wide enough for a man to step through. Victor Hale stepped through it. He was unhurried. His jacket was still buttoned. His silver hair sat exactly as it always did. He looked at the room the way he looked at most things, with the composed attention of a man taking inventory, and his gaze moved from Grace to Lily to Marcus on the floor, and settled there for a moment before he spoke. I think that's enough, he said. His voice was even, almost gentle, the same voice that had told Marcus across countless desks, in dinner tables, in difficult phone calls, that everything was going to be fine. His eyes moved to Lily and stayed there. Victor moved into the room without hurry. He stepped around the displaced bookcase, the way a man steps around furniture that has been rearranged without his permission, noting it, dismissing it, moving past it. His eyes swept the room, once taking inventory the way they always did, and then he crossed to the desk where the secondary phone sat, face up, its screen still faintly lit. He picked it up. He found the audio file without difficulty. It was the only recent item in the folder, and deleted it. Then he cleared the recently deleted cache the way someone does when they know how these things work and have thought about it in advance. He set the phone back on the desk with the particular care of a man who does not leave things out of place. There, he said, quietly, almost to himself, the word of someone completing a task they had begun some time ago and were now finally able to close. He looked at Marcus. Marcus was no longer on the floor. He had risen at some point in the seconds since Victor entered, not quickly, not with the sharp momentum of anger, but with the slow, deliberate movement of someone who has decided something and is done deciding. He stood beside the bookcase, with his arms at his sides, his face carrying none of the uncertainty that had lived there for 7 weeks. The grief was still present. It would not go anywhere tonight. but it had been joined by something else, something that stood behind the eyes and did not move. Victor studied him for a moment. "It's over, Marcus," he said. His voice held the same even warmth it always had, the voice of the most reasonable man in the room. "Let it go. I've been telling you that for months." He spread his hands slightly, a gesture of openness, of patience. "James is gone. The investigation is closed. You have a company to run and a life to get back to. And none of this," he gestured at the darkened room, the displaced furniture, the 3 people standing in it, "none of this changes anything." Marcus said nothing. He looked at Lily. She was still at the desk, exactly where she had been, her hands resting in her lap. She met his gaze, across the room, direct, steady, the way she met everything. And then, once she dipped her chin, small, certain, Marcus looked back at Victor. "Check Grace's phone," he said. Victor's expression didn't change immediately. The shift was minimal, a fractional stillness, the kind that happens in the space between hearing something and understanding what it means. He turned. Grace was standing near the doorway, where she had moved sometime in the last few minutes, without anyone marking the moment. She was upright, her shoulders back, her face composed in a way that it had not been for most of the night. In her hand, she held her personal phone, the one she carried in her jacket pocket, the one that had been with her through the car ride, in the guest room, in the hours downstairs in the dark. The screen was lit. An audio file was playing. The static came through the small speaker, thinly compressed but present, and underneath it, unmistakably, the shape of a voice that had been recorded in a quiet room by a man who had known when he made it that he was leaving something behind. Victor looked at it. He looked at it the way a man looks at something that has removed all remaining options from the table, not with panic, not with the visible collapse of a person caught, but with the particular stillness of someone recalibrating, taking stock of a changed landscape, deciding what, if anything, remained to be done. "My daddy always said, keep a backup somewhere. They won't look," Lily said. She said it simply, without satisfaction, without triumph. The way she said most things, because it was true, and truth didn't require a delivery. Victor's gaze moved to her. Marcus had already crossed the room. He picked up the secondary phone from the desk, the one Victor had just cleared, and dialed. The call connected on the second ring. He spoke briefly, clearly, in the voice of a man giving an address and a situation to someone who needed both. He gave the address of the estate. He said there was an individual on the premises who needed to be detained in connection with an investigation into a death that had been incorrectly ruled self-determined. He gave Victor's full name. Then he ended the call and set the phone down. Victor had not moved. He stood in the center of the room, with his hands at his sides, and his jacket still buttoned, and his expression carrying the composed resignation of a man who has played a long game, played it well, and arrived at the end of it. He did not look at Marcus. He did not look at Grace. He did not look at the phone in Grace's hand, still playing its thin, persistent audio into the quiet room. He looked at Lily. The silence between them lasted several seconds. Then, in the same voice he had used across boardroom tables, and in the back seats of cars, and in every quiet hallway conversation that Marcus had ever trusted. Without question, Victor spoke. "You're a very smart little girl," he said. Soft, measured. The words themselves unremarkable, but underneath them, in the particular quality of the stillness that followed, in the way his gaze held hers, with the focused attention of someone who files things away and does not forget them, there was something that did not need to be said aloud to be understood. Lily looked back at him. She did not blink. She did not shift her weight or drop her eyes or look to Marcus or her mother for the reassurance that most 9-year-olds would have reached for instinctively. She simply looked at him, steady, present, giving nothing away, the way she had looked at everything in this house, from the very first night she sat on her stool in the kitchen and heard something in a recording that no one else had bothered to find. From outside, distant but growing, the sound of sirens moved through the Houston night toward River Oaks. The lights came first, blue and red moving across the ceiling of the study, through the windows, painting the walls in slow, alternating sweeps that had a strange, almost deliberate quality in the pre-dawn dark. Marcus watched them from where he stood, not moving, not speaking, as the sound of car doors and radio static in measured footsteps came up the front path and into the house. It didn't take long. Victor went without incident. That was the only way to describe it. Without incident, without resistance, with the same composed cooperation he brought to everything. He spoke when spoken to. He answered the questions put to him with the brevity of a man who had already decided what he would and would not say. He was escorted through the front door of a house he had walked through freely for 15 years. And the last Marcus saw of him was the back of his jacket moving through the entrance hall in the company of 2 officers who did not yet fully understand what they were holding. The house took a long time to quiet after that. By the time the morning came properly, the real morning, the one with light that meant something, a detective named Reyes had sat up in the dining room with a recorder and a legal pad, and the particular patience of someone accustomed to waiting for people to find their way to the truth at whatever speed they needed. He was a compact man in his early 50s, unhurried in his manner, with the kind of face that didn't give much away, but didn't ask for much either. He had reviewed the preliminary information on the drive over and had enough to begin. He told Marcus that at the outset, that they had enough to begin and that anything Marcus could add would help them understand the full picture. Marcus sat across from him at the long dining table, the one Grace had set for meals he had barely touched over the past weeks, and he talked. He started at the beginning. Not the beginning of the recording, not the beginning of the investigation, but the actual beginning, the phone call 7 weeks ago, the drive to the scene, the report that hadn't felt right from the first page, the investigators he had hired privately, the file that everyone had told him was empty, the thing he had heard in it that he couldn't name and couldn't let go of. He talked about Victor, 15 years of it, the deals, the counsel, the presence that had filled the gaps. He talked about what it had cost him to hear Lily say the name, and what it had cost him more to understand that she was right. He talked about the overseas account and the folder James had named, and the message his brother had built into a recording and buried deep enough that it had taken a 9-year-old girl to find it. He did not edit any of it. He did not consider as he spoke how it would sound, or what it would mean for the company, or whether any of it served his interests in some calculable way. He simply said what had happened in the order it had happened, and let Detective Reyes write it down. It took 2 hours. When he was done, the room felt different, lighter, in a way that had nothing to do with the morning sun coming through the windows, which it was falling across the table in long, clean lines that hadn't been there when they started. Reyes reviewed his notes without speaking for a moment. Then he looked up. "The recording," he said. "The girl, she reconstructed it from memory." "Yes," Marcus said. Reyes wrote something. "And the original file. The one on the secondary phone, it was deleted. Victor deleted it. The copy on Grace's phone is intact." Reyes nodded. He asked 3 more questions, all of them specific, all of them answered. Then he capped his pen and stood. "Give me a few minutes," he said, and left the room. In the hallway outside, Grace and Lily sat side by side on the narrow bench that ran along the wall beneath a row of framed photographs Marcus had stopped seeing years ago. Grace sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, the posture of a woman who had spent her life in other people's houses and knew instinctively how to occupy a space without claiming it. But her right hand had moved at some point, sometime in the night, or the early morning, or the long stretch between, and found Lily's, and she had not let go. Lily sat beside her, with her feet not quite reaching the floor, her library book on her knees, unopened. She wasn't reading. She wasn't doing the focused inward thing she did when she was working through something. She was simply sitting close to her mother, in the particular stillness of someone who has done what they came to do, and is now content to let the world catch up. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The hallway was warm, with morning light now. And somewhere in the kitchen, a clock ticked with the same steadiness it had always had, indifferent to everything that had passed through the house since midnight, marking the seconds with the same patient reliability as always. Lily looked down at their joined hands. Grace tightened her grip slightly, without looking up. Reyes came back 20 minutes later. He moved through the dining room doorway with the particular economy of a man who has received information that confirms what he already suspected and is deciding how to deliver it. He pulled out the chair across from Marcus, sat down, and placed both hands flat on the table. "The overseas account," he said. "Our financial crimes unit ran a preliminary search while we were talking." He paused, not for effect, but the way people pause when a fact is heavy enough to need a moment of its own before it's released. "The Geneva account. Everything's there. Just like the recording said." Marcus looked at him. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He sat with those words settling into him the way water settles into dry ground, slowly, completely, finding every space that had been waiting for it. James had told him where to look. He had always known where to look. He had just needed someone to listen long enough to find it. The hours between morning and afternoon had a texture that Marcus would not remember clearly afterward. There had been more conversations with Reyes, with the department's financial crimes unit, with his own attorney, a woman named Carol Sims, who had driven over from downtown at 7 in the morning and spent 3 hours sitting beside him, making sure he said the right things in the right order. There had been phone calls he made, and phone calls he didn't return. There had been a point somewhere around noon when Grace had brought a plate of food into the dining room and set it in front of him without comment, and he had eaten half of it without tasting any of it. And that had been the most normal thing that happened all day. By early afternoon, the gate at the end of the driveway had acquired an audience. It had started with one van, a local news crew, that had picked up the police scanner traffic sometime before dawn. By the time the sun was fully overhead, it had become 4, then 6, cameras and microphones and reporters standing in the narrow margin between the estate's property line and the public sidewalk patient, and practiced and waiting for something to point their lenses at. Marcus stood at the window of the front sitting room and looked at them for a long time. Carol stood beside him. "You don't have to do this today," she said. "We can issue a written statement, keep it contained." "No," Marcus said. "Marcus, I've been keeping things contained for 7 weeks." He turned from the window. "I'm done with that." He went through the front door without notes. He had thought briefly about what he might say. He had considered the way these things were usually handled, the measured language, the careful framing, the words chosen to protect, as much as they disclosed. He understood the value of that. He had used it himself, in other contexts, many times. He walked down the front path, and none of it seemed relevant anymore. The cameras found him immediately. The reporters adjusted, repositioned, settled into the particular alertness of people who have been waiting and have just seen what they were waiting for begin to arrive. A cluster of microphones appeared at the gate extended over the iron railing. Marcus stopped on his side of it. He became aware, at the edge of his vision of movement, behind him, a small figure that had come through the front door and walked down the path without being asked, stopping a few feet to his left, with a library book still tucked under one arm, and an expression of simple, quiet attention on her face. He looked at her. She looked back at him briefly, then returned her attention to the gate. He looked back at the cameras. Behind them, both at the top of the front steps, Grace stood in the afternoon light. She had changed at some point, a clean jacket over her work clothes, her hair pulled back. She stood with her hands at her sides and her chin level, looking out at the gathered cameras and reporters, with an expression that held nothing apologetic in it. Not defiant, not performing, simply present in full, without the slight forward angle that had characterized every moment she had spent in this house until now. Marcus turned to the microphones. "My brother James did not make the choice the official report described," he said. His voice was even carrying the voice he used in boardrooms and on stages when something needed to be heard clearly and remembered. "He was taken from this world by someone who had access to his life and used it. The person responsible is in custody. The evidence that led to this outcome has been provided to investigators, and I will cooperate fully with everything that follows." He paused. The cameras were still. The reporters were still. Even the ambient sound of the street behind them seemed to thin. "I want to say one more thing," Marcus continued. "The evidence that broke this open was not found by a law firm or a private investigation team or a forensic specialist. It was found by a 9-year-old girl who listened to a recording that every adult in my life had already dismissed." He stopped. "Let that stand. She heard what I refused to, and I owe her more than I know how to say." He didn't gesture toward Lily. He didn't draw the cameras to her. He simply said it, and let it be true, in the open air in front of people whose job it was to make things permanent. A reporter called out a question, then another. Marcus held up a hand, not sharply, just firmly, and the questions settled. He turned from the gate. Lily was still standing where she had been watching the reporters watch them. She seemed neither pleased nor uncomfortable with any of it. She had the aspect of someone observing a system operate, noting how it worked, filing it away. Marcus walked back toward the house. When he reached Grace, he stopped. She met his eyes without any adjustment, no downward angle, no careful neutrality. Just direct level, the gaze of a woman who had spent a night in a dark room, listening to her daughter hold a story together with her bare hands, and had come out the other side of it, knowing exactly where she stood. "I'd like to talk about Lily's future," Marcus said. "Not as a favor." He said the next part clearly, without softening it into something easier. "As a debt I intend to repay." Grace looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, deliberate, the nod of someone accepting a thing that is being offered properly. They went inside. The front sitting room was quiet. After the noise of the gate, Lily had come in behind them and settled on the window seat, her book finally open in her lap, though Marcus suspected she wasn't reading it. The afternoon light came through at a low angle, catching the dust that had been stirred up by the morning's activity and hadn't settled yet. Marcus sat across from her. He was still holding the weight of the last 12 hours somewhere in his body, in his shoulders, in the space behind his sternum. But it felt different now, less like something pressing inward, and more like something that had been set down and not yet picked back up. He looked at Lily. She had closed her book. She was looking at him with the focused, unhurried attention that he had come to recognize as her version of a question, the look she had before she said something she had been holding for a while. "Did your brother know," she asked, "that someone would find it?" Marcus went still. Not because the question surprised him. He had thought about it in the margins of everything else that had happened since the recording played, but because she had asked it the way she asked everything, directly, without preamble, as though the answer mattered more than the asking, and there was no reason to delay getting to it. He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, the sound of the news vans had begun to thin, a door closing, an engine, the day beginning finally to exhale. Marcus did not answer right away. Marcus looked at Lily for a moment longer. Then he said, "Come with me." He stood and walked toward the hallway, and she followed, her book left on the window seat, her footsteps quiet behind his on the stairs. He led her up to the second floor and down the corridor that ran along the east side of the house, past the guest suite where Grace had slept, past the linen closet, and the framed watercolor that had always hung slightly crooked, and that he had always meant to straighten and never had. He stopped at the last door on the left. He stood there for a moment, with his hand not quite on the handle, close to it, almost touching the way you stand at the edge of something you have been circling for a long time, without quite stepping into. Then he pressed the handle down and opened the door. The room inside was still. Not neglected. Someone on the household staff had kept it dusted, kept the air from going stale, kept the surfaces clear, in the careful, respectful way of people who understand that certain rooms need to be maintained, even when no one is ready to enter them. The afternoon light came in through the partially open curtains and fell across the desk, the bookshelves, the the small reading chair in the corner that had a particular indentation in the cushion from years of use. James's room. Not a guest room. Not storage. His room, the one he used on the weeks he stayed at the estate for work, which had been often in the last years. It had the particular quality of a space that had been lived in by someone specific, shaped by their habits and preferences, and had not yet let go of those shapes. Marcus stepped inside. Lily followed, stopping just past the threshold, the way she always did in new rooms, taking it in before she moved further into it. "He stayed here a lot?" she asked. 4, 5 nights a month, more toward the end. Marcus moved to the window and adjusted the curtain still lightly, letting in more of the afternoon. He liked working from here because the office downtown was too loud for him. He said he couldn't hear himself think. He said it without planning to. It was just true, and it came out the way true things do when you've stopped managing them. "He sounds different from you," Lily said. Not a judgment. An observation. "He was." Marcus turned from the window. "I always moved toward noise. Meetings, calls, deals. The louder a room got, the better I understood it." He looked at the desk, the clean surface, the lamp in the corner, the small stack of books that had been left exactly as James had left them. James went the other direction. He'd rather sit with one person for 3 hours than stand in a room of 50 for 30 minutes. He said you got more that way. Lily had moved further into the room now, slowly following the perimeter, the way she moved through spaces she was reading. She paused at the bookshelf, tilted her head slightly at the titles, moved on. "He was right," she said. "I know that now." She stopped at the desk. On the corner of it, set slightly apart from the books, the way a photograph gets placed when someone wants it visible rather than stored, was a framed picture. 2 men at what appeared to be a construction site, both in hard hats, both laughing at something outside the frame. The older one had an ease about him, a looseness in the shoulders, the look of someone who was entirely comfortable wherever he happened to be standing. Lily looked at it for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched the corner of the frame lightly, the way she touched most things. Not claiming, just acknowledging. "Did he know?" she asked. The question from the sitting room returned to not dropped, just held until the right place for it. Marcus stood beside her and looked at the photograph. "Yes," he said. "I think he did." He was quiet for a moment, and then the rest of it came slowly, the way things come, when you've stopped trying to find the right words and let the true ones arrive instead. "He knew I would fight it. He knew I'd hire investigators and read reports and do everything except the one thing that would actually work." A pause. "So he put it somewhere that required a different kind of listening. And he waited. He waited for someone like me," Lily said. "I think he waited for you specifically," Marcus said. "He just didn't know your name yet." Lily looked at the photograph for another moment. Then she said simply, "He looks like someone who listened." Marcus looked at his brother's face. In the photograph, the laughing, easy face of a man who had always known how to be exactly where he was. He looked at it the way you look at something, when the looking itself has changed, when the image is the same but you are not, and the distance between what you see and what you feel has finally, after a long time, stopped being a wound and become something else, something quieter, something that sat still. He reached out and straightened the frame, slightly. It had been angled a fraction too far to the right, the way things shift, imperceptibly, over time, and left his hand there for a moment after the adjustment was done. "He was the better one of us," Marcus said. "That was never a question." Lily said nothing. She didn't offer reassurance or contradiction, because she understood somehow that neither was what he needed. She just stood there beside him in the afternoon light, present the way she was always present, fully, without condition, taking nothing, and giving the moment exactly the space it needed. After a while, they moved toward the door. Marcus went through first, then waited as Lily stepped into the hallway. He turned back to the room, the afternoon light still coming through the curtains, the photograph still on the corner of the desk, the reading chair with its worn indentation. He took hold of the door and pulled it toward him. He didn't close it fully. He brought it to within an inch of the frame and left it there open, just enough that the light from the hallway reached the floor inside, just enough that the room was no longer sealed off from the rest of the house. He left his hand on the door for a moment. Then he let go. The kitchen was the last room to go quiet. It always had been in the months Grace had worked in this house. She had noticed that. The rest of the estate settled in layers. As the evening progressed, the formal rooms first, then the upstairs, then the long hallways. But the kitchen held on to the day a little longer. The warmth from the stove, the particular smell of a room that had been used and not yet fully released back into neutrality. She was finishing the last of the cleanup when Marcus appeared in the doorway. Not the way he had appeared that first morning. Urgent, controlled, carrying something he needed answered immediately. This time, he simply stood there, and when she looked up, he said, "Do you have a few minutes?" Grace set down the dish towel. Yes, he had set up in the small sitting room off the kitchen. Not the formal rooms, not the study. The room with the 2 armchairs and the low table and the lamp that gave off a warmer light than the overheads. The kind of room that wasn't trying to impress anyone. She sat across from him. He didn't lead with pleasantries. He had clearly decided at some point between the afternoon and now that pleasantries were not what this conversation required. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not a general one, a specific one." Grace waited. "Someone used your professional reputation and your financial situation to place you inside this house," he said. "He knew you were good at your work. He knew you needed the income. And he knew that a woman in your position, working in a household like this one, would keep her head down and not ask questions." He paused, not for effect, to make sure he got the next part right. "He used everything that was true about you and turned it into a mechanism. And I employed that mechanism without ever looking at it closely enough to see what it was." Grace sat with that. She had heard apologies before, the professional kind, the liability-conscious kind, the kind that people offer when they want to close a chapter and move forward. This was not any of those kinds. This was a man saying a specific thing about a specific wrong, and she recognized the difference. "You didn't know," she said. "That's not an excuse," Marcus said. "It's just a fact. And it doesn't change what happened to you, or what could have happened to Lily." He stopped on that word, held it for a moment, the weight of it. She was in that room. She was in this house. And the reason she was here at all was because someone calculated that you were the right person to bring through my door without raising any flags. He looked at her directly. "I'm sorry for that. All of it." The room was quiet. Grace had spent a significant portion of the last 24 hours deciding how she felt about what had happened, trying to sort through the layers of it, what she had known and not known, what she had walked herself and her daughter into without understanding what she was walking into. She had not arrived at a clean feeling. She suspected she wouldn't for some time. But she knew the difference between an apology that wanted something and one that didn't. "I appreciate that," she said, meaning it. Marcus nodded. He reached to the side table where a document had been sitting face down since before she came in. He turned it over and set it on the low table between them. It was brief, a single page, the kind of document that had already been reviewed by someone who knew what they were doing, the language plain and direct, in the way of things that are meant to hold. "Full scholarship," he said. "Any school she qualifies for, any field she chooses." He picked up the pen from beside it and signed the bottom without ceremony, the way a person signs something they have already fully decided on. "There's a supporting fund for expenses, housing materials, whatever she needs. It renews each year. No review process." He set the pen down. "It's done. No conditions, no strings." Grace looked at the document. She read it carefully, the way she read everything, not because she distrusted it, but because she was a person who believed that important things deserved full attention. She read it to the end, and then she sat with it for a moment, the page in her hands, the lamp warm beside her. She had raised Lily alone for 6 years. She had worked in other people's kitchens and other people's houses, and she had done it well, and without complaint, because it was what needed doing, and she was the one to do it. She had watched her daughter sit on a step stool in the corner of every room, and read books, and listened to things no one else listened to. And she had thought, in the quiet of the evenings, there is something in this child that the world does not yet know what to do with. She set the document back on the table. "Her father would have liked you," she said. The words came out quietly, without preamble, not offered as comfort, not as flattery, simply as a true thing she had thought and decided to say. Marcus looked at her. He didn't respond. There was nothing to respond to. It wasn't a statement that needed answering. It was just something Grace had known about her late husband and something she now knew about Marcus Holt, and she had placed the two things briefly in the same sentence because they belonged there. She folded the document once and placed it in the inside pocket of her jacket. "I'll make sure she knows what this means," Grace said, standing smoothing the front of her jacket with both hands. "Not just the practical part, what it means." "I know you will," Marcus said. She left him there. Marcus stayed in the chair after she had gone. The house was fully quiet now, the kind of quiet that meant everyone in it had found their place for the night and settled. Outside the single window in the sitting room, Houston had done what it did at this hour, pulled its energy inward, left the streets to the people who needed them, sent the rest of its light upward into the low clouds that sat above the city like a ceiling that had absorbed years of warmth, and now gave it back slowly, steadily, in a glow that was neither day nor night, but something the city had made for itself. Marcus looked at it. He had stood at this window before, or windows like it in the months since James had gone, and the city had always looked the same and felt the same, a weight pressing outward from inside his chest, a dullness behind everything. Tonight, it looked the same, but the weight was not there. He sat with the absence of it for a moment, the way you register silence after a long noise, not dramatically, not with relief that announces itself, but with the quiet recognition of something that has simply, without fanfare, stopped. He stayed at the window a little while longer. Then he got up and turned off the lamp. Somewhere in the house, a clock marked the hour. Lily had been sitting in Marcus's study for 20 minutes before she turned the recording on. She had not come here with urgency. She had come the way you go back to a place that has asked something significant of you, not to revisit the asking, but simply to be in that space one more time before you leave it. The room looked different at night, without the emergency of the last hours filling it. The displaced bookcase had been moved back into place. The desk was clear. The lamp in the corner gave off a steady, even light that had nothing tense in it, and the window showed Houston in its late-night state, the city still present, but unhurried, its lights steady and patient above the darkened lawn. Lily sat in the chair across from the desk. She had the secondary phone in her hands. Marcus had left it on the desk after everything, and she had picked it up with the simple directness of a child who sees something that belongs to a task she was part of. She turned it over once in her hands, then navigated to the audio folder. The file was gone from this device. Victor had deleted it, and that deletion stood. But the micro SD card was still seated in the slot, and on it the copy remained. She found it without difficulty, set the phone on the arm of the chair, with the speaker facing up, and pressed play. She did not lean forward. She did not tilt her head or close her eyes, or bring any of the focused apparatus of her listening to bear on what came through the speaker. She simply sat with her hands in her lap and let the sound come to her. The recording began, the way it always had, the static, the familiar texture of old equipment in a quiet room, the low interference that had occupied so many hours of so many people's attention. And then James's voice, exactly where it had always been speaking, in the careful way of someone recording something they meant to keep. But something was different now. Not in the recording itself. The file was the same file, same compression, same audio quality, same digital copy of a copy that had lost something in the transfer. None of that had changed. What had changed was the listening. She was not trying to find anything. She was not mapping or reconstructing or filling in the gaps. She was just hearing it the way you hear music when you have stopped analyzing it and let it simply be what it is. And in that mode of hearing, The recording gave back something it had never quite given before. Not information, not evidence, just a voice. A man's voice, recorded in a quiet room, speaking with the particular care of someone who had thought about what he wanted to say and had decided to say it plainly. It had warmth in it, the warmth of someone who had been in the way that mattered good at the work of being a person. The warmth of someone who noticed things and held them carefully and understood that attention was a form of love. Lily listened to it all the way through. When the deep layer arrived, the second voice, the part that had taken everything she had to surface, it came through with the same faint, pressed quality it always had on this copy. She did not reach for it. She let it pass through the way water passes over a stone it has been passing over for a long time, not stopped, not changed, simply moved through. And as it passed, something in her face shifted. Not much. The corners of her mouth moved in a direction they had not moved at any point in the last 4 days, upward slightly. The kind of smile that doesn't announce itself or ask to be noticed. The smile of someone who has heard something that confirms what they already understood and finds the confirmation sufficient. The file reached its end. The static thinned to nothing. The room was quiet. From the hallway, soft footsteps, the particular sound of her mother moving through an unfamiliar house with the careful consideration of someone who didn't want to disturb anything. Then a light knock at the study doorframe. "Time to go, baby." Grace's voice low and warm, carrying the particular gentleness of a woman who had had a long day and was ready to end it somewhere that wasn't here. "Okay," Lily said. She stood. She set the phone back on the desk, exactly where she had found it. Not because anyone had asked her to, but because that was how she returned things. She picked up her library book from the arm of the chair where she had set it when she sat down. Then she looked at the desk. The micro SD card was still in the phone's side slot. She removed it, a small movement, a thumbnail. Pressed the card, releasing, with the faint click of something precisely fitted. She turned it over once, in her fingers, the way she had turned it over in the dark of this room 2 nights ago, when everything had still been uncertain. She set it on the desk, in the center, where it would be found without being looked for. She did not write anything beside it. She did not leave a note or an explanation or anything that would require a response. The card had done what it had come to do, and it belonged here now, in this room, in this house, with the man who would know what it was and what it had meant. She stepped back from the desk. The room was the way she had found it, lamp on window, showing the city, the displaced bookcase, fully back in place against the wall. She looked at it for a moment, in the way she looked at rooms she was leaving, taking a last inventory, the way some part of her always did, the way it probably always would. Then, barely above a breath, so quiet it was almost only for herself. "Goodbye, Mr. James." She turned. Her mother was waiting in the doorway, with her jacket on and her bag over her shoulder, and Lily walked toward her with her book under her arm and her footsteps quiet on the floor. And she went through the door and into the hallway and did not look back at the room she left behind. Morning came into Houston the way it sometimes does, in October, quietly. Without announcement, the sky shifting from the deep blue of pre-dawn into something softer and more considered before the sun itself fully arrived. The kind of morning that doesn't demand anything of you, that simply offers itself and waits. The estate was already awake in the small ways that large houses wake a door somewhere, the sound of the kitchen beginning its day, the distant automated sprinklers moving across the back lawn with their patient, indifferent rotation. Grace came downstairs, first her bag over her shoulder, her jacket on. She moved through the front hall with the same care. She had always moved through this house quietly, precisely, leaving no trace. But there was something different in the way she carried herself this morning. Not louder, not more assertive, simply more fully present the way a person is when they have stopped bracing for something and can finally just stand. Lily came behind her library book, under her arm backpack properly, on both shoulders this time. They crossed the front hall together. Marcus was at the door before they reached it. He had been awake for an hour, maybe more, standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, doing the particular kind of nothing that is actually a person, preparing themselves for a moment they don't quite have language for. He had heard them on the stairs and come to the entrance hall, and now stood at the open front door, with the morning coming in around him, the light still pale and new. He looked at Grace first. She met his eyes the way she had met them last night, directly, fully, without adjustment. She gave a small nod, the kind that carries more than courtesy in it, and he returned it with the same weight. Then he looked at Lily. She had stopped a few feet from the door, the way she always stopped at thresholds, not hesitating, just reading the space before she moved through it. She was looking at him with her clear, steady attention, and in the morning light, she looked, he thought, exactly like herself. No more, no less, 9 years old, slight for her age, with careful eyes that missed nothing, and a library book under her arm that she had not opened once in 4 days. He said what he had decided to say, and nothing more. "Come back any time," he said. "The door is open." Lily looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said. And that was enough for both of them. It was exactly enough. The front path was short, maybe 30 feet from the door to the gate. The gate stood open in the morning air, the iron dark against the pale sky. The street beyond it, quiet and unhurried. Grace went first. Lily followed. The path was made of flat stone, each piece set level with the next, and Lily walked it the way she walked everything, at her own pace, taking it as it came. But somewhere between the third stone and the fourth, something shifted. Her shoulders, which had carried the careful, contained posture of someone who understood exactly how much space they were permitted to occupy, that posture that had been present from the first night she sat on her step-stool in the kitchen, settled. Not dropped, settled. The way something settles when it has found the position it was always meant to be in. Her chin came up a fraction. Her steps didn't change in speed or sound, but they had a different quality to them now. The quality of someone walking on ground that belongs in some essential way to them. She reached the gate. She stepped through it. On the other side, the sidewalk stretched in both directions in the clean morning light, and Lily turned left, without hesitation, toward the bus stop at the end of the block, and she walked without looking down. Marcus stood at the store and watched them go. He watched until they turned at the corner, and the street gave them back to the morning, and then he stayed at the door a little while longer, the way you stay when something has finished, and you are not quite ready to go back inside, to the life that continues after it. The coffee in his hand had gone cold an hour ago. He didn't drink it. He stood there in this open doorway of a house that had, in the last 4 days, become something different from what it had been, not outwardly, not in any way you could point to or document or file in a folder, but different in the way that rooms become different after something real has happened in them. After someone has brought what they actually were into the space, fully without apology, and the space has been changed by it. On the desk in his study, a small card sat in the center of the surface where it would be found without being looked for. In the guest suite, upstairs, a folded blanket lay across the foot of a bed. In the kitchen, a step stool was tucked beside the pantry door where it had been left, and the slight mark it had made on the floor tiles over the past months was the kind of mark that doesn't come out with cleaning and eventually stops being a mark and becomes just part of the floor. These were the things she had left behind. Not the recording, not the evidence, not the chain of events she had set in motion simply by hearing something in a piece of audio that the world had already decided was empty. Just the ordinary marks of a person who had been present. If this story stayed with you, if something in it reminded you of the people in your own life who listened when no one else did, who saw what others chose not to see, take a moment to share it. Leave a word in the comments about where you're watching from. And if you'd like more stories like this one, the next one is already waiting. Because that's what stories do. They wait for the right person to find them. Not everything important arrives in a suit. Sometimes it arrives in a little girl who simply refused to stop listening.